trying to figure out how to register.
Well, yeah, just to, you know.
We wanted to give a little extra time for everyone to get in here with our COVID checkpoint outside, and thank you all for going through that. I would like to welcome you to the first in-person artist talk at Cuesta College through the Harold J. Miossi Gallery that has happened since the onset of COVID-19. We're really excited to be back in person, having artist talks in person once again, and we have high hopes that this will continue and we'll be able to get more and more integrated and back to at least a new normal. So thanks for coming. When I started this position, I came in and there was a really amazing show that had been delayed and kind of canceled because of COVID, and that was Nobles Among Us with Sommer, who's here to talk tonight. And I was more than happy to reach out and set that show back up because she is a real talent and she's a local artist who's really making some really interesting and creative work. Nobles Among Us is on display in the Miossi Gallery and will be continuing to be on display until April 1st. So there's lots of time to see it. After this talk, the gallery will be open. There will be refreshments. And we encourage you to just go over and stop by after having seen Sommer discuss her work. It might give you more insight into it. And it's always fun to see the work after you see the artist discuss it. This artist talk is going to be about an hour long. At the end, we'll have 10 minutes of questions and answers. For those of you viewing online, we will have the discussion board set up so that you can ask questions, and we will make sure we try and answer them the best we can. So, Sommer Roman was born and raised in California. She received her BA from UC Santa Cruz in 2004, and her MFA from UC Santa Barbara in 2014. She maintains a multidisciplinary practice spanning sculpture, painting, and drawing. She lived in the Central Coast of California, right here in San Luis Obispo, with her husband and 2 young children, and occasionally teaches at local universities. Some of her more recent exhibitions have been In the Woods, Perpetual Youth, a solo exhibition at the Ventura College in 2018, Biomass Contemporary Meditations on Nature, a group exhibition at the Wilding Museum in Solvang, California, and Living Matter, a group exhibition at the State Chechikov Gallery in Moscow, Russia. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Sommer Roman.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. Hello. Wow, it's crazy to be here in person. So thank you for just coming out. And we were all a little rusty after the waves of COVID. So just you being here means a lot, coming out to Cuesta. So thank you for being here, and I want to say a public thank you to Cuesta College and the HJ Miossi Gallery and the team, to Emma, who is here also, Emma Saperstein, who originally invited me to do this exhibition, and then Tim Stark, who's now in the role, who carried the torch and helped really make the show happen. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. It's an amazing gallery and space, so I'm just honored. And it's really cool to be a local artist, to have a show in an awesome space. I remember being here for an artist talk before the pandemic, and it's just a little bit of a trip to be right here now in the podium. So, all right. A little, let's see, outline. If my voice gets muffled, just let me know. I don't know. Just kind of what to expect. I'm just going to give you a little general statement of kind of idea of what my work's about in general, and dive into the show. Who has seen the show? Okay, no worries, it's kind of helpful to know. And I'm going to give you a little more insight into just generally my materials, how I use them, my process, some studio insights, and then a little bit more background on some of my recent projects in the last 5-ish years, and then time for questions. So that's what you can expect. And what was I going to say? Yeah, I think I was going to do some bio, but I think Tim covered it. So some of the things I think about, questions I ask, and the aims of my work. And this first part is a little bit text heavy, so you don't have to read, but it's just up there. So I'm interested in these aspects of being human, the human experience, and sort of our relationship to other humans, but also the non-human world, being the plant world and animal world, and really to then kind of further understand ourselves. I'm interested then in these sort of non-traditional ways of how we might think and know. So I like proposing this ultra-logical, multi-sensory intellect that goes beyond the cerebral and verbal ways that we kind of traditionally think we know things. Instead, I'm kind of proposing this thing that returns us into realms of the wild, the body, the corporal, and domestic spaces as sources of knowing and knowledge. And I aim to evoke a sense of wonder about ourselves and our relationship to other. And furthermore, I hope to recall an innate kinship, an essential sort of mutuality between the plant, animal, and the human that I would say is core to our aliveness. And I aim to do this through creating a universe, really, of 2D works on paper and sculptural works of hybridized forms that are playful and imaginative, absurd, alluring, familiar, and yet strange. So at large, that's kind of what I'm thinking about a lot in my work, and then each sort of specific project or body of work might be diving into that a little more specifically or asking a little more of a specific question. Is this muffled at all? So, nobles among us. Material thoughts on a poetic ecology. I know it's very wordy. So I'm going to give you insight into that a little bit. Why is this not? Okay, clicking on the wrong part. So again, a little text heavy right in the front. I want to give you insight a little bit into where this title came from, and thus like the concepts that I'm sort of thinking about. I've been reading this book called The Biology of Wonder by the biologist and philosopher Andreas Weber, German. And he proposes this term of poetic ecology. And it's kind of his way of understanding our ecosystem, how we're all a part of it, how we're really this interrelated, we're all interrelated species, and we're sort of, instead of these machine-like beings, we're really all full of meaning and expression and feeling, and that in sort of really understanding the core of that is our key to understanding our existence and kind of, furthermore, getting out of our ecological crisis. So these two quotes I sort of pulled from this book, for me, encapsulated like some of the ideas were really exciting for me. And I think I was already thinking about this, but kind of reading his work deepened that and solidified and affirmed and kind of gave it, he's sort of the biologist and philosopher. I get to be the artist and pull from these fun ideas. But, so these two quotes really say it beautifully in terms of, again, how I started thinking. Hopefully you can kind of take that and think about it in terms of what I was making. So, a poetic ecology restores the human to its rightful place within nature, without sacrificing the otherness and the strangeness and the nobility of other beings. A poetic ecology allows us to find our place in the grand whole again. From this vantage point, we can perhaps start to sketch what the sociobiologist Edward O. Wilson has called a second enlightenment, no longer putting the human apart from all living beings. So moving forward, some of those themes then I kind of grabbing from those ideas are reciprocity, mutuality, and interdependence. How is that coming into work? I'm just kind of pointing to a few little moments. There's these little gestures in the work. You know, there's on the right, there's a piece called, your left, Behold, this tiny clasp of fabric that's almost like a little hand that's holding then these sort of petal-like forms. And then those, you can't actually see the top, but it's holding another little plant. And again, they are all in a relationship where everything is holding one another, and they are interdependent. The middle piece is called New Alignment, and everything is sort of aligned on the braid, gold braid. That's the only thing attached to the wall, and the sort of center bone is hanging on that, which that holds the dried thistle. So again, they're in this intimacy, and they're all holding each other in balance. And again, I think the last piece on the right is titled Reciprocity. Again, the fabric is housing intimately little seed pods or fabric balls. And then that is all held together by sort of the quote-unquote bone apparatus. And then there's sort of in the larger installation, you can see moments of this. It was tricky. We had also arranged the large branches so no one would trip. But it was key for me to think about them as also holding one another. So the large sculpture, the queen, she is fairly awkward and heavy, and so it was kind of nice to use the branches to literally hold her in place and keep her stable. That it kind of works in line with what I'm thinking about anyway, so it made sense to have them a little more intertwined, moments of touching and keeping them sort of together. And there's like a smaller bone piece that's like also delicately touching and kind of, on the verge of falling off, but it's not, it's sort of held. Okay, more ideas that are in the show. It's kind of in the statement, I talk about using this idea from the French philosopher René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And I've sort of been thinking about this ever since grad school, really, and kind of obsessed as just this idea of like the head and how we have pigeonholed it as like in this box, that this is where we're rational beings. This is our intellect right here. And we kind of we have this kind of, it's up on the value scale. So I kind of taking that, and also I think at the time that was probably a very important move in history, but I think now it's become overvalued and in a sense severed it, this idea that thinking mind, severed it from the body. So I'm kind of taking that and having fun with returning it back to other realms. So the head, actually I wanted to say something going back. The piece on the right is actually a piece from grad school. It's a self-portrait where I kind of just ripped off like this enlightened male with a white wig and instead made something ridiculous to put on my head. It was handmade and a little hairy and bulbous and large and just a little bit ridiculous, and I titled it, I Make, Therefore I Am. But moving back to the show. So again, I just kind of was obsessed with these large head-like forms. these visions and sort of images kept coming to me, so they needed to be brought to life. So I'm kind of, again, riffing off of, I think, therefore I am, taking these heads and pushing them into everything other. So making them something wild, something bodily, something of nature, sometimes feminine, delicate, soft and weird, kind of everything other than being something that's very rational and like put together. This is particularly sort of the center sculptural form. So this is another picture of the more anthropomorphic floor sculptures in the show, if you haven't been in there yet. And then you see the same imagery in the 2D works and the works on paper. Again, they're not functioning as like, I don't draw forms and the forms are not of the drawings. They're just in the same family and coexist together. They're just sort of another way of bringing the forms to life, if you will. I'm going to return to that later about how those were made, the works on paper. But again, sort of humor pieces that really address the head. We have this piece on the left that's titled, "We Are Here to Self-Reflect." And there is a mirror in the center, and it's placed on the wall, so you are approaching it where your head more or less would come into the center. It's kind of a way to implicate you into the work, so it becomes less of an object you're just looking at and enjoying it. Maybe you're in it a little bit. Always thinking about that in my work, like how can I get the viewer, the visitor, to return it back to them in some sort of introspection. And so the mirror is a fun way to do that every now and then. And the piece on the right, you know, it is a head-like form where I have removed any facial features. Instead, it becomes reconstituted, just hairy, the braids are in a different place, kind of emphasizing more the beastly and wild aspects of our beingness and how we might think and know. And sometimes purposely trying to like the one on the left is a little more alluring and welcoming, kind of has the gesture of like, come in, and it's playful and it's colorful, and the other one's a little more repulsive, as it is a hairy face. All right, the nobles. So it is called Nobles Among Us, so I thought I'm just gonna go for it and title the main floor pieces, give them noble names. So we have the Empress, the Prince, the Queen, and the Duke. And here I really am using this to collapse old orders of where humans are sort of superior or at the top of the chain, in a way playfully setting a new stage. And the one in the center and the largest piece is the Queen, and she then is strategically being placed as the top of the order, really, and she kind of commands the show, the dynamic of the pieces, and even hopefully the viewers in the middle of that. And I see her sort of helping to reverse this order in just who she is. You know, she is feminine, she's crafty, she's plant, animal, she's colorful and flamboyant and playful. She's made from stained, used clothing, so things that aren't eventually always at the top, she becomes that and sort of the commanding force. So juxtaposed with the larger works I just kind of showed you are these very, very small wall pieces. I find that they bring contrast to the big works, which are very maximalist in their size and materials, how they're almost overworked, they're excessive. Some have maybe 1,000 pieces in them. And here are just these very micro moments, very intimate, very simplified. In a way, I'm wanting to bring you closer into that moment. So really then, you're kind of forced to consider the 2 to 4 things that I've used. The one branch, the 1 or 2 colors, and the small gestures and moments in those pieces. So it is sort of a moment to slow down and contemplate what's there. And some of them are pretty fragile, so I think also like kind of elevating their mundane and fragility into something of like precious and of value. And I see them too as like in relationship to the larger works as they kind of encapsulate the similar ideas of being hybridized form and in like ideas of interdependence and mutuality, but they're just like very pared down and highly curated and just very few gestures. So curious to know how you find them. Can you tell me later? So the one on the left is inner knowings, the middle is behold, and the right is soft ideas. And there's more, I'm just showing you some of them. Some of the other smaller, medium-sized works, some other kind of side theme is that I find in the work is this idea of nature as sort of our first habitat or first shelter or protector. And I think that alone gives them sort of putting the highlight on their value or nobility. And all the pieces that are sort of found nature objects are, I haven't really intervened in the sense I'm not putting any holes in them. So they're sort of the voids or holes or places that I've sort of stuck things are naturally occurring. And I just give myself the authority to play with that and give it, you know, these moments of the human element and the fabric. I probably mentioned this earlier because it comes in later, but all the fabric I do use is discarded and has been, 99% of it has been part of a body. So it's used clothing and linens, been a part of a home or a body. And that's really important. One, I'm regenerating and giving new life, but I like that it has this memory of the human experience, which is pretty central to my work. Should I mention that? No. So yeah, I think here, again, this idea of mutuality that like in a way, my small interventions here help elevate or give us, like help us re-look at this little twig or little branch or bark, and vice versa, like the rock or the branch helps us kind of appreciate the little color or this moment of materiality. So I was gonna decode some other things for you, insight, some sort of repeating called visual vocabulary that's happening in the work. The braid is something that's on all the pieces, but it's in several pieces. Just keeps coming back to my work. Like I just can't stay away from the braid. And you know, as it is a reference to hair, for me it's then just sort of a reference to life, the human life. It is something mundane and very personal, sometimes repulsive because it's hair, but I think it's sometimes a symbol of the feminine and also just a source of, like, symbol of strength, as it's sort of three strands that does become pretty strong. So all of that, the braid, is like, I can't stay away from the braid. And then there's elements of gold and silver in the show, and that was a fun way to add some bling to speak of this idea of value and nobility. And then there's a reference to bone, and it's using something called paper clay, which I'm going to explain in a little bit here. I am using it to reference bone in the human body, and also adds a nice visual contrast, I find, to the soft fabrics and some of the like brown wood and sometimes hard-edged, more industrial materials that come to the work at times. And then mirrors, which I mentioned earlier, are another part of the work that it's my way to implicate the human and the viewer into the work to initiate some sort of level of introspection and to see yourselves in and among the work. And again, where are we fitting into this sort of ecosystem? Okay, the works on paper. I've gotten a lot of questions about these, so I'm just gonna give you an insight of how they were created. They are Giclée limited edition prints. So, but they start as a mixture of drawings. They're just kind of examples of what some of my fast, sometimes even doodles, that kind of just come pretty quickly. These forms just kind of come to me. Everything gets scanned. I'm also on the side doing a lot of small paintings with acrylic and ink. Acrylic ink and watercolor. And again, they're sort of all separate parts, and those get scanned. And then I digitally collage them into a form. So I'm not digitally painting, I'm just using the digital tools to play. And I'm cutting parts, repeating parts, enlarging, reducing, and building up a new form. It's something I started doing during the pandemic, which I felt the stakes were kind of low, and it was just something else to kind of experiment with. And I think it's kind of those moments where we do take different risks, or we start something new. And I didn't really know what was happening, but I ended up building this whole body of these plant forms that kept just coming to me. They kind of have become a little family. So yeah, there is no original of these forms. The original is a digital composite. And it does go in line, my sculptural process is also very additive and collage-like. I'm constantly adding parts, breaking down, adding part, reconstituting. So it's very, yeah, still very similar. Okay, that's pretty much what I was talking about in terms of the show. And if you felt like I didn't, there's something you're really curious about in terms of any particular piece, please ask me during the question time or in the gallery later. I would love to kind of fill any gaps in there. So I wanted to talk a little more about my process and just little studio insights. Process is very important to me, and I'm very led by materials and just, I might have an idea of what I want to do, but it's not going to end up there. That's just my way to get started in the process, taking apart, this is not working. It's just very material and process led. I'm looking at nature a lot. I'm not looking at to replicate it or to just represent it, but I look at it as inspiration. When I see crazy, weird forms that are just absurd and amazing, it just ushers me forward to keep making weird forms too. I mean, it's just amazing. So looking at nature, thinking about the relationship with it is really how I'm thinking about that observation. Finding this shared DNA, a seed pod that looks like a brain, a branch looks like a knee. These are always moments for me that are kind of pushing my work in new directions and keeping these concepts going. So like I said, I'm sourcing all discarded fabrics, shirts, linens, you name it, pillows, found nature objects, fake fur, feathers, rocks, fake grass at times, depending on the work. I use, at times, the sewing machine in a very basic way. I sometimes hand sew. I glue, like the hot glue gun is my friend. The rotary cutter, wire, thread. I'm breaking down parts, breaking down the fabric in a sense, and I'm using very basic gestures. It's not this highly crazy technique. I'm folding, rolling, binding, stuffing, and every variation I do on that, whether it's once the fabric changes, once if it's thick or thin, if the bind is loose or tight, every change changes the outcome, and that's kind of how the work started back in 2011, and it kind of became a playground for me. I just was so fascinated how this fabric, which once had a natural beginning in nature, kind of became this man-made, material to clothe us and give us shelter. Then returning it to, in a way, something that was mimicking nature was really fascinating for me. That's kind of the beginnings of my manipulation of fabric. I'm building lots of parts, love color families, love color. So always thinking about this. There's the glue gun, and again, just like a pile of parts. Because sometimes I'm making something and it just doesn't end up in a piece, so then I end up really collecting just a ton of parts that always find their way in another piece later on. So yeah, just another insight into sort of these forms that kind of got originally and still do kind of excited about the possibilities and potential of just this material and the forms that can be created. Little insight into the unrefined sculpture. I'm using like inside, like armatures can be anything like household discard objects like a lampshade, or I also use insulation foam, the great stuff, to build up volume that's light. So if I need something to be light, I can use that, or I can use something heavy. But again, very additive, so like depending on materials, seeing what's working. Sometimes I get halfway through a piece and I'm like, it's not working. And I always love this moment because it's so much time and I know it has to be taken apart. So I'm like tearing it apart, and I have to learn this lesson over and over again, but usually in that breaking down process, I kind of end up seeing the materials a little bit differently, and I end up tweaking it a little bit, and one or two pieces, maybe components kind of get eliminated, and it evolves in a new direction. I do find when I trust that process, the work ends up being a little more evolved and refined, and maybe more surprising. Again, very material-led. There's the Miossi little space. And you can see a lot happening at once. So sometimes things are gluing and working on a lot of different things at the same time. It worked well that way. Or I need to leave a piece aside, work on another one. I always think it's nice to see inside the space where the artist is working. There's more like internal sort of armatures inside. Again, it's also very collage and additive style where I find discarded home objects that if I need something to give me rigidity and structure, sometimes those like old bathroom shower baskets work really well. Or I think that's a toilet paper roll stand. So it's just perfect. I love the mundane, everyday pieces, and I'm giving them a new purpose. And just to give you insight into what's happening inside. And then the last part, because I do get questions about this paper clay material that I've been working with. It's made from, the image on the left shows a pulped toilet paper. So I got this recipe online from a craft guru. She does paper clay everything. Started doing this in grad school. So I was looking for another material to add to sort of my fabric. And so it's toilet paper and joint compound, flour, oil, and glue. So again, kind of like really in line with what I'm interested in, very craft-based, mundane materials or domestic materials. And I literally like use a drill. Feels like weird, like I'm a carpenter, but also a chef. Like I love making cookie dough, and I feel like I'm making cookie dough because I get like a beater, but it's like a drill side. And there's my paper clay. And that gets coated on forms. I just build up, and anything go inside. And I think I'm giving a demo to any of these students, so I'm excited to show you this process. And it gets coated with masking tape to kind of have like a barrier. And there's my daughter learning the process herself, coating the paper clay onto these forms, and there's a whole drying process, and voila, you get these bone-like things, and they can be painted and whatnot. But it's actually very like strong, and I like that it emulates the look of plaster, but plaster is just so much so fragile. So I like, this is not so fragile, but there's a strength, and I find that like it can make a lot of different forms that I'm wanting. So, a little break. That's my process. Again, if you want to know more, ask a little question later. And time, I'm doing good? Okay. So going to finish here with a little insight into some of my recent projects. So other exhibitions in the last 5 years. Actually, do start with very exciting, some very early work. So this was like 2011 when I first started working with fabric. That was like a huge piece I did. I was living in the DC area at the time and at an awesome community college. Community college? Very formative time, and awesome teachers. Yeah, so these are some of my early forms. I think I was mostly interested in just sort of like fascinated with the manipulation of the fabric and the forms and textures I was able to come up with. So again, this kind of idea of transformation and regeneration. And very nature-based. Just some images, older work. And then fast forward to grad school. You know, grad school is when it gets all literally pulled apart, and I was just questioning everything. There was a time for me to really dive into the conceptual depth of the work, and I think I started thinking, I realized I was thinking about the body more than I didn't realize how important that was, and so then I started bringing the body into the work, started photographing the work on myself, and digitally kind of playing and making it even weirder and more hybridized. I kind of pushed the sort of more absurdity aspect and moving away from it just maybe being a pretty sculpture of something natural. So that was giving myself permission during that time. It's what grad school's so great, kind of just pushing the envelope of what, you know, of the work. I started dipping fabric in resin to harden it and just bringing in, that's when I started bringing in like more housing materials and like more wood, like building wood, not like the found stuff, and paint and paper clay. And that was my grad MFA show. Just, again, a lot more material now. You know, I'm using photography and light and paper clay, and like, still the sculptures were there, but they were just a different aspect of it. And then right after, I was given an artist in residence position at UC Santa Barbara, and it was just such a nice time, really just time and space. So a lot of space, which I was able to continue to make big work. And I kind of just kept working and taking more risks and working a little more experimentally and working big. So dipping the fabric in resin and doing paper clay and letting things be loose and less refined, a little more messy, and kind of finding that like in between. I was thinking about play a lot more. And that culminated in a solo exhibition called Passage. And you can see a lot more of bringing light and yeah. Kind of just little glimpses without boring you too much. So that's some of the work from that show. That's where like that hardened stuff is just the resin dipped fabric. I kind of don't do that anymore because it's pretty toxic. And you know, a little bit years later, was pregnant with kids, so I was like, no more of that. And it's just very involved, and you need a lot of space, which I don't have anymore. So right after that, I was a part of a show in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, another group show. And really cool space, and got to participate in that. And again, the work was still in this kind of like very inspired by like Jessica Stockholder, getting a little more loose, using the color of sort of these found mundane objects from everyday life, thinking about play. And then this one Tim did mention. So this one was in 2018, and this was at Ventura College, and this was called In the Woods, Perpetual Youth. This was a solo show. And here I'm kind of returning, actually, kind of going full circle back to some of like my original work, and kind of now finding with much more conceptual depth. I kind of wanted getting back to something a little more refined and tight, and I feel like it was like an unfinished sentence. So and I'm still kind of there. But, so again, back to these sort of strange hybridized forms. And I started pairing, it was up close. And I wanted to bring the 2D, like drawing and painting, back into my work. So this show, I was able to kind of pair them. So you can kind of see in the background some large drawings. So I'll quickly mention that. This is a side body of work that's sort of just ongoing, and I call these cell portraits. They're highly detailed. So I use micron pens, and they're literally everything's circles. But I'm looking at microscopic imagery from something from a plant, and then also from something from the body, and I'm pairing them, and to get at the same idea, actually, of the interconnectedness of the human and the plant world. So, for example, this one is the largest piece, and that I've done. I used a residency to complete it, and I literally almost lost my hand. It's just because always is this. It's like really bad for the wrist, but this one is a cross section of blade of grass paired with a cross section of human skin receptor, sensory receptors. So I'm looking at the imagery. I'm not like, and then I composite how they're going to interplay, and I might repeat it to then get a new form. And they're all circles, and that's why I kind of call it a portrait, because there's these portals / portraits, and I'm kind of trying to still speak of the human. So anyways, this one is kind of about that nonverbal exchange where we touch. You know, you ever have bare feet on grass? So again, this quiet moment that we're having with nature that we might, just kind of goes unspoken about. So little moments, and then there's a few other ones. This one on the left is called "Do You Make Wishes?" and that's a human cross section of human trachea with a cross section. I think it's like of the root. It's usually the root or the stem of a plant. It's a beautiful imagery if you ever looked it up online. Of a dandelion. So again, that moment where we're using our body to blow the dandelion and make a wish. Again, this silent, nonverbal moment we have with nature. Oops. And the middle one is "One Day You'll Find One," and that's the human eyelid cross section paired with a 4-leaf clover. So again, the search, the nonverbal search for that plant that's going to bring you fortune. And the last one is "Blood and Sap." So that's a cross section of a human artery, so like our lifeline, the bloodline, and it's crossed with the pine tree, which is, one of the pine trees is the oldest living organism, so it is a symbol for us as like life and longevity. So I took, again, two things that kind of have this idea of life and longevity and paired them. So that's the cell portrait drawing series. And then a recent show this last summer, fall, at the Wilding Museum, a really cool space in Solvang. And everything you do is nature or surrounding nature. So this show was about meditations on nature, a group exhibition. I did have 2 sculptures and then the cell portrait drawings in them, in the show. And then the last, one of the more recent shows I was in was a really awesome group show, though I didn't go because it's in Moscow, at the Perpetual gallery, but called Living Matter, and it also is about sort of the role of man in the planet's ecosystem and where we're at in that. I just had 3 of my drawings, portrait drawings that I sent there, but these are sort of installed, like huge show, like international artists from around the world. It's an amazing work. My drawings are still there. Kind of a strange time, but supposedly it might happen. They might be moving the show into St. Petersburg to have a second rendition of it. But yeah, that's the end of my talk. Say 6 minutes. We're at the hour. Great time for questions. So.
Thank you, Sommer. Yeah, we have a good amount of time for questions. So if anyone in the audience has questions, we'll go to you first, and then we'll swing back to the people viewing on YouTube, see if anybody has questions there. So if you have questions, raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone to you like we're on Oprah.
Hey, just the formula for paper clay again. I got as far as water, oil, and glue as the last 3.
question about paper play.
Yeah, it has pulped toilet paper.
Toilet paper.
So yeah,
Joint compound.
joint compound, flour,
Flour.
and oil. Could be like mineral oil is like the best, and all-purpose glue. You can find it online.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to know if you dyed all that fabric yourself.
Oh, no, I forgot I should have said that. I do not. Because it's found, existing clothing. I really love working with what I find. So like, it does limit me, because if I find an amazing green, it's really hard to go find that same green again. But like there's been one time in when I was doing this crazy like ombre thing, I dyed to get like a very specific gray. But it's really a whole nother thing, and I just like working with what I find. And also just like, each piece of clothing might come with an interesting like edge or just material that's just more fun than just going to the fabric store. Though I do love fabric stores. Oh yeah.
Do you have the result in mind when because your work is really conceptual and like a lot of the shows that you have a lot of like, this is the meaning I want to portray. Do you go into making work and like making all those small pieces with the result in mind, or do you
The physical result?
with the concept, like trying to translate that through your work, or do you, as you create a piece, are like, this is what it is? Like what is that process?
That's a really good question. It is, it's like I have like general ideas, and things I'm interested in, and I have a way of working. So this kind of starts from there, and I think some of the ideas get flushed out really later on, like more specifically, kind of like, I think things get worked out like in a silent way and through the materials that I kind of have to just trust. And things does kind of like, what I'm like thinking about ends up in the work. Whether I'm like, and forcing it never doesn't help. But I kind of have to have everything because I'm so process-led. So it's like I have the ideas, and I might even start with like even a visual idea, like, oh, this is kind of like idea of like maybe a sculpture. That's really just a way to get me going. It never arrives. It never ends that way, which I love because it's too so forced. It just is not how it works. I mean, some other people might work well that way, but I don't know if I answered your question, but it's really like the whole process. I think the work, physical work itself, and the concept are just evolving, and it's kind of the end. Everything kind of like, okay, it's coming together. Yeah, hope that answered your question. Yeah.
I have a question about how you connect all of your pieces. This one up here, are they hand sewn together? Are they glued together?
So for the one on this piece, like all the little pieces are hand sewn or sewn, sometimes with a machine, because that was a lot of parts. And then they get mostly glued together. Yeah, depending on the mode. Like sometimes I do a mixture. Like sometimes I feel like if I need extra strength, it'll be a combination. So it really depends. But I do end up using, hot glue has proved its strength to me over time. I have still pieces and they're very solid. And sometimes it actually literally is plastic at the end, so it gives it a rigidity and weight to the piece. But yeah, it's a combination. And I'm using wire too. Like sometimes the ball things are bound with wire, so it's pretty strong, like thin but strong wire, or sometimes really strong thread. So, yeah.
I have kind of a two-part question for you. And so many artists these days are dealing, the NFT thing and dealing with their relationship with technology and are sort of keeping a relationship with technology. So one of my questions is, do you use any sort of technological processes in your work? Like, are you processing things through the computer or drawing on an iPad? And then the second question is, do you have a ritual around spending time with nature? Because it's so
first question, I forgot to repeat questions. Sorry about that. Do I have a relationship with technology and how that plays into my work? A lot of the sculptures, I would say not really, but some of my new works on paper, they were digitally collaged, so that was a new. I use Photoshop, and I have a side thing where I do like whimsical illustrations for children. So I have skills in the digital world, but I've kept them pretty separate until now. But I did kind of use those skills to play with this imagery for this body of work. And it's great. But normally I'm so love slow, obsessive handmade process. Like I really value that. But I don't, not so much where I'm I poo-poo the technology. I think it's great too. I mean, so I think it's kind of interesting pairing because I have so much handmade and very laborious work that's not fast and not technology. It's really the opposite, but maybe it adds to the dialogue of the pieces. Okay, and your second question.
Ritual.
Oh, my rituals, and do I have sort of rituals in nature for myself? Yes, but I don't do it enough because I also have 2 small children at home. More to say that just my time is just really crunched. But I mean, my little studio now sits within a little eucalyptus grove in our backyard, so I do feel like that works. I am resourced and re-energized in nature for sure, and it's always been a part of my life. I think I'm always wanting and needing more of it, but walking and observing is, I would say that more than anything. Walking in nature and observing is actually pretty daily, so yeah.
How much work do you do before that? How much work do you do that informs your final pieces?
How much work do I do beforehand that inform the final pieces? Like prep work, or?
Sure.
I mean, sometimes I sketch ideas in the beginning, but I don't always. I sometimes do the sketching alongside if I'm trying to figure something out, but I don't. I guess I don't know. I kind of just get going. I don't know if prep work mean by building the parts or.
I mean, do you do them in series? Do you do 20 of something so you build something that you create that? I really do parts to make the pieces.
Okay.
But you make several of the pieces before you come to a place that you're.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a back and forth. Say you need to start somewhere, so I make some pieces, and then it's sometimes I have existing pieces from old work. I'm oh, how does this look here? But if I know I've made a decision, I want a block of an area full of blue bulbous forms, then I'm okay, I have to stop and just get to making balls. So and then it's that gets really tiring. I have to break. It feels mechanical, and then I have to go back in the studio, and then there's more of the creative process of what's next. So it's kind of both, It's the mass production of parts happens beginning, middle, and end, and yeah. Hope that.
That was really my question.
It wasn't.
My question is, how many pieces do you actually do in the preparation for your final concept shows? Not just sketches, but actual works.
Smaller.
Smaller or maquettes or.
I don't do maquettes, actually, no. I just start on the actual piece. So I don't do pre-works. Yeah. I just kind of get going. And I sometimes sketch. I'm always drawing, I would say, but it's not always sketching the work. If that makes sense. Just kind of have a side ongoing, I love drawing and painting, but sometimes it's just kind of in the same family and creating works alongside the sculptures. I really hope I got answered your question. Yes.
How did you come to the idea of the cell portraits combining the plant cells and the
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think it was like when I had gone back to school, went back to community college around 2010, 2011. I was like in the library and I found this like old book of micrographs of plant life, and I was like, oh my, these are amazing. And I already was always doing like my doodles are very circle based. And I saw, I was like, hey, that looks like what I do, but this is like nature, this is real. And so I got the book, and the first thing I did was sort of just translate it. Like I looked at it and I like, in a way, copied it, but like I wasn't trying to be exact. I was like, oh, what was like, and then it was like, that wasn't as interesting. So it kind of morphed into using the imagery to create something that had more to say. And then I find it's an interesting body of work for me because I feel there's less of me in it in a way. Like I'm translating these micrographs, microscopic imagery, not so technically where it has to be exact again, but it's kind of like it's not like made up from me exactly either. So I feel like I'm kind of a co-creator, but my creativity, I guess, comes in where I get to pick the imagery and know where I want to slice it and have it play with the other imagery. And sometimes it gets repeated. So yeah, that's kind of where the idea came from. They're also very laborious, but can be kind of meditative. Literally, I'm just drawing circles, and I like the result. I think they're interesting. Kind of have this very macro feel, and then very micro, like kind of the cosmos are there, but it speaks of the this tiny cell too. I love that. Oh wow. This is from my daughter. Hello, Vienna. She asked, how long does it take to make one of my sculptures? A very long time. No. Okay. So my large sculptures, actually a lot of people do ask me this question. So my large sculptures, I don't like time them, but I would say they take a long time. I mean, I don't also work on just one. So again, I can't really I can spend months on one piece. Like the queen in the show, the large one, months. I also take breaks because they're very laborious. But then there's like the very small pieces. It's hard to encapsulate like how long it takes. So I would say like the coming together of like the three little things might not take that long, but it's really like those wouldn't exist if I wasn't spending years on these other larger sculptures. Like they exist because of the other ones exist, and the process of the big ones make the other ones they make sense to me. So the sculptures take quite a while. Hello Vienna and hello Solomon online. Sorry, that was a family thing. Any other questions from online? No? Okay.
Can I ask about, so much of in this show you have this structure, this shape that has a very skinny thing and it has this head or this blue up top, and is that connected to this theme of the nobles? Could you say more about that structure, that shape?
Yeah. I would say first, that's the imagery that just kept coming to me. For some reason, very large, heavy heads on a very skinny stem. And again, it's part of I'm just gonna bring this to life. But I think it was a way, I think ultimately, again, the concept kind of made sense where it's kind of about exaggerating and emphasizing the head. And how we do kind of overvalue this idea of the brain and heads where we are smart and intellectuals. So then I just kind of turned it into something else. Everything else that I wanted to kind of rethink about, the body and the wild, and just kind of turn it into something a little more ridiculous. And I think the skinny thing just maybe helped. The skinny stem just gives it a plant-like, also a little bit anthropomorphic form, but it just helps to accentuate the heaviness of the head. Yeah. says, remind me about the twist on the I think, therefore I am quote, and how that reflects in your work. So, the I think, therefore I am quote, for me represents a time, where we started to like think about the thinking rational being. I'm not trying to discount that place in history, and I'm not a philosopher, but I think it's also work to sort of sever the mind from the body, and that they were separate. So I'm kind of taking that back and riffing off it to remind and to return the thinking parts of ourselves and humans into something more integrated, more interconnected to all these things that we know from and think through our bodies, even through the things around us like nature, and we think animal-like, that we're all interconnected. And so those are all sources of how we kind of move through and think through our life, our human experience. Hope that makes sense. And it's kind of a lot. I mean, the way I work, I have a lot of different ideas that are kind of bleeding into my work. And I hope this kind of decoded some of it for you. And my hope, too, is that you can kind of enjoy the work, whether you know this or not, this kind of other side, that my work is accessible and exciting and maybe stimulating in other ways. But there is this other kind of side to it as well.
One last question, or? I would like to thank everyone for coming and all the people online for joining us as well. The gallery is open. There are refreshments. Sommer will be there as well. I invite you all to go on back there and enjoy the show. The exhibition is open through April 1st, and I just wanted to plug our next exhibition, which is really exciting. It's our student annual art exhibition, which is coming up, and it will be in person once again in the gallery. It's always a big exhibition full of lots of really excellent work from students at Cuesta from the 2021-2022 school year. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My day.